Welcome again to Joe Stun Unboxing. National apologist for phone tapping, police bribing and photo doctoring, Piers Morgan has a show called Piers Morgan Uncensored, an independent show, he says, where there's only one boss, and that's me, of course, Piers. Okay. This is a person I'd normally avoid like the clap, because he is, as far as human beings go, he's just a sort of cocksplat. But he did have Oleksandr Usyk and Daniel Dubois on his show, so I forced myself to watch it. And it was a reasonable interview. I mean, some of his questions were somewhat banal, but he also asked some pretty decent questions as well. So looking at it objectively, I mean, first of all, you have to say that you've got two very sort of contrasting characters, obviously, Usyk and Dubois. And I have to say his English has improved greatly, so well done, Daniel. But Morgan approached them both with similar questions, but in a slightly different manner. So with Usyk, he asked him a lot he asked them both actually about their fathers. And with Usyk, because Usyk's father has passed and Daniel's hasn't, Morgan wanted to hear from Usyk about the influence of his father, and Usyk spoke very lovingly of him. And, you know, his father passed just after he'd won the gold medal at the Olympics. And the final conversation they had, the father said to Oleksandr Usyk, well, you know, I love you. And I think he said that's the only time he ever told him it. He had that sort of stoic, emotionally non-committal attitude that a lot of people of previous generations in this country had, the UK. My mother is 87 and she's exactly the same. She never told me she loved me in her life, ever, even when I was a kid. But they had that stoic, almost like to show emotion as a weakness sort of attitude. And you can argue the toss about that, but that's just the way they are. It's a generational thing. World War II era, that sort of keep calm and carry on thing, I suppose. And then with Daniel, because Daniel's father is very much alive and very much prominent in his life and at the foreground of his career, he spoke very lovingly about his father. And in fact, it was noticeable because Daniel is trying to cultivate this sort of Sonny Liston-esque persona, and no one is buying it. No one's buying it. But when he was asked about his father, Daniel suddenly became, I'm tempted to say, the real Daniel, because he has a big smile on his face. I mean, he comes across as being like a big kid, doesn't he? And how many people have said that he's on the spectrum in some form or other? And he just seemed very, very genuine and very, very, delighted to talk about his father, who he obviously loves very, very much. With Usyk, it was more of a, there was a little bit more somber, although Usyk, he did talk, bearing in mind that you're talking to someone with broken English. You're talking to two people with broken English, aren't you? But, Usyk was a little bit more, there was a tinge of sadness there when he was talking about his dad, because his dad's no longer with him. The fight itself, there was obviously, Morgan had to jump on this. This was the banal stuff. Morgan had to jump on the bandwagon regarding the so-called low punch. It wasn't a low punch. It was a low punch. The so-called, let me get this right. Morgan had to talk about the so-called punch that was rendered low, was considered low by the referee, and which Dubois and his teams are saying it wasn't a low punch. It was perfectly legitimate, and I was robbed of a unified championship victory, which is a completely false narrative, which it's created by, I don't believe Daniel's pulled this out of his arse. I think it's come from Warren and almost certainly Don Charles, who's been quite idiotic in the way he's set about Usyk regarding this matter, and probably Stan Dubois in on the mix and all this sort of stuff. But Morgan has to stir the pudding with that because it's supposedly controversial. and it's a good hook on which to sell the fighters if the fight needs selling. This is at Wembley Stadium, of course. Expect to sell out. Warren himself has said that he thinks 60,000 tickets went on the first day, which is stunning. But Hearn used to talk about instant sellouts in 15 minutes when he was with Sky, but of course a lot of those went to secondary markets, StubHub and certain others. So we'll see. But I would expect it to be it's a July fight. I would expect it to be a sellout. And apart from all the low blow nonsense and Daniel saying that it's going to be a bloodbath, and Morgan did raise the issue of, the disparity between support. Now, what he perceives to be the disparity in support, because he didn't seem aware that Usyk has won every one of his world title fights abroad, has had the whole boxing industry really against him in many respects, has always gone in against the promoters' favourites and won, almost always convincingly, very convincingly. Has had split decisions that should have been wide unanimous decisions. They've tried everything to get rid of this guy, and yet there he is. And I think that it's a mistake for Morgan or anyone else to say, well, it'll be, maybe if there's 100,000 people there, 70% of them will be British. There's a few Ukrainians in Britain. Look, PIERS, PIERS, Oleksandr Usyk has a lot of support from UK people, a lot of support. Why? Because he's been here before. And most importantly of all, not only has he beaten our guys, he's behaved like a perfect gentleman doing it. He's a very likeable, genuine character, okay? He doesn't trash talk, he doesn't talk any crap. He just gets on with it. He's humorous. He tries to speak English, even though he doesn't always quite have the vocabulary yet. But he makes an effort. He's always accessible. He's just a nice guy. So don't expect him to come out to an ocean of booze. No, he'll be cheered to that ring. You mark my words, he'll be cheered to that ring. And that's not to say that Daniel won't be. He'll get his cheers. Of course he will. He's in London, yeah. So Morgan was way wide of the mark on that one. And then Morgan starts to talk to Usyk, bearing in mind that Usyk does have limited English skills. He starts to talk to him about geopolitics, about Ukraine, about Zelensky, about all the, his hometown. Usyk's hometown was apparently flattened. Lots of people have been murdered, killed essentially, and they call it collateral damage, don't they? And and then he asked him what he thought of Putin. What does he think of what Trump's trying to do? You've got to wonder why he's talking to a guy about some very serious geopolitical matters, and the guy, English isn't his first language. But of course, he has something greater than that, which is personal experience. His family from there, he's lived there, he's been over there since the war started, and I don't know what they did with Daniel when this was going on, because he was out of camera shot. I think they probably just gave him a piece of paper with "Please turn over" written on both sides and said, "You entertain yourself and let the adults do the talking." Well, that's what you might think. But actually, when they went over to Daniel and Morgan alluded to what Usyk had just said about the Ukraine situation, Daniel he had a little bit more insight than you might expect. He was actually quite, gregarious towards Usyk. Said he's a hero to his people, he respects that, and so on. So well done, Daniel. Big up, Daniel. Let's not take the piss too much. And why Morgan felt the need to sort of bring that into it. I mean, I can understand him asking Usyk those questions if it was just Oleksandr Usyk, if he was interviewing Usyk about his life. But this was supposed to be about the fight coming up. And I'm quite prepared to listen to what Usyk's got to say about his private life or his home country or whatever, and the same with Daniel. But it seemed to me that this was something of a diversion from the fight itself. I suppose he had to pad out 50 minutes or whatever it was on his little podcast, so he had to ask those questions. Morgan also said that he thinks Oleksandr Usyk is one of the top 3 heavyweights ever. And the other 2 would be, in his opinion, Muhammad Ali and Lennox Lewis. No argument with Muhammad Ali. I was a big Lennox fan as well. You ever heard of Joe Louis, Piers? Yeah? Don't know, just saying. Bally was very flattering about Usyk in that respect. And I thought, in all honesty, I thought Usyk and Dubois came across pretty positively in this whole 50-minute thing. So I don't know, did you see this? Did you see it? What did you think if you did see it? I mean, I can't fucking stand Piers Morgan, but I thought this was okay. This was an okay interview, you know. It wasn't quite the car crash that I thought it might be when I heard about it. I thought, Piers Morgan, oh, what the fuck, you know. And he seems to watch a bit of boxing, Piers. I don't know whether he knows what he's looking at. I don't think he doesn't understand the history of boxing, I don't think. You sort of read between the lines of what he said. He knows a bit, but he's probably more to the casual camp than the hardcore camp, let's put it that way. But well, tell me what you thought about this. What did you think? How do you think they both came across? I couldn't read anything into it with regard to where they were both at psychologically. I mean, Usyk is just Usyk. He's just chilled and speaks very honestly, tells a few funny stories, like about the time he was knocked out by a horse, kicked in the head by a horse, or head-butted by a horse, was it? And knocked out when he was working on a farm. And, you know, Daniel talked about when he was a kid, his dad used to make him do knuckle push-ups for like 3 or 4 hours a day. You know, those are interesting little things, but it's not really relevant to the fight coming up. Because as we know, when that bell goes, it's the loneliest place in the world. But let me know what you think. If you've got any thoughts, leave them below. Thank you very much for watching this video. Please subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. And I will give your comments a read and answer as many as I can. All right, ladies and gentlemen. I watched it, so you don't have to. I'm just kidding. Go watch it. It's all right. It's all right. Piers Morgan. Anyway, I'll get you later. Bye for now.